Hello and welcome to the UK Democracy Network's first how-to workshop. And thank you so much for joining us for this session. This session is being recorded and will be made available to Democracy Network members. So if you're watching this recording after the event has taken place, then a very warm welcome to you too. We'll be fielding questions as part of this workshop, but if you're watching this back at a later date and have any further questions, then please feel free to get in touch and we'll do our best to answer them for you. So my name is James Moulding, and I'm the UK Democracy Network's Network Development Lead. The UK Democracy Network strengthens the relationships and connections between organisations, projects, and individuals working to build a healthy democracy in the UK, providing you with the resources, information, and collaboration opportunities to take your work to the next level. We are a UK-wide network spanning Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England, and membership is free to open to all working on or around issues of democracy, power, and voice in the United Kingdom. So as I say, I think this is our first how-to workshop, and we're going to be running these regular workshops, providing you, the organisations, projects, campaigners, and practitioners of the democracy sector, with the tools, concepts, and learning from experts within and outside the democracy movement. In today's session, we'll be taking a deep dive into the world of AI, or artificial intelligence, and democracy, with our guest speaker, Hannah O'Rourke from Campaign Lab. Hannah has been running Campaign Lab now since about 2018, working to connect political campaigners and civic technologists, running frequent and regular hackathons to introduce the world of campaigning, leafleting, canvassing, and persuasion to the very different experiences of developers and programmers, developing websites, apps, databases, and so on. In this overlapping of these two quite disparate communities, Hannah and the Campaign Lab team have produced an interesting and impactful array of projects. Hannah and the team are currently also looking at experiments and efforts focusing on turnout in the upcoming by-elections. So if you know anybody working on these by-elections or turnout, please do pop it in the chat and reach out to Hannah. Previously, Hannah was the director of Labour Together, and Hannah is also co-author of the book Reorganise, 15 Stories of Workers Fighting Back in the Digital Age. Over the past 9 months or so, Hannah's been looking into experimenting with the new ChatGPT large language models, AI tools, and trying to understand how these tools will come to impact politics and campaigning, as they likely will, in massive and fundamentally transformative ways. In this session, Hannah will unpack her work and learnings for approximately about an hour, taking us into a deep dive into OpenAI's ChatGPT tool, amongst others. So if you've not used these tools before, don't worry too much. This is a workshop for first-timers who've never used these tools before, and you definitely don't need to code to understand this. These tools can be used by absolutely anybody. After Hannah's introduction to these tools, we'll take around 20 minutes of questions before finishing off around 4 p.m. If you have any urgent clarifying questions throughout the session, do feel free to raise your hand, and we'll use the Zoom raise hand reaction in the bottom panel. We might also be pausing in the middle for some questions up to Hannah in the middle of the session as well. So also, just as an extra side note, if you'd like to hear more about future upcoming workshops or to get involved in the nascent AI and democracy group that we're currently setting up, or to get involved in the wider Democracy Network itself, you can let us know or sign up in the final right-hand column of that check-in spreadsheet that I've just posted in the chat. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Hannah O'Rourke. Welcome, Hannah. Thanks.
Thanks, James, for that very kind introduction. And hello to everybody. For those of you that don't know, James is actually a co-founder of Campaign Lab too. So it's really nice to be back with him and meeting you all today here at the Democracy Network. So let me just share my screen so we can start. 1 second. I think I may have it. Okay. I'm currently on your check-in. Okay. So I'm just going to start the slideshow. So yeah, this is kind of, I guess, a slide deck that I've adapted from many different sessions that I've run with a lot of different groups now, looking particularly at AI tools and campaigning, and thinking a little bit about some of the ethics around this, but also zooming in really kind of focused on the practical uses and the ways that kind of people can just start to use these kind of tools in their work day to day. So before we begin, I'm Hannah, I'm co-organizer for Campaign Lab. As James said, we're a community of progressive data scientists, researchers, activists who are all kind of working together to think differently about how we campaign, across the kind of progressive ecosystem. So the purpose of today, very much exploring. No one is an expert. This is a very practical session. It's the basics. And also one thing you might want to do while we're sort of like going through things today is you might want to sort of like log into ChatGPT, make an account, and just follow along with us. And I'll sort of explore the different things that we can do. So very keen for you all to be trying this as well at the same time. Another thing that I'd really encourage you to do is use the chat. I'm really keen to make sure that people can sort of, you know, talk to each other, learn from each other. This isn't just about me talking to all of you, it's also about you guys talking to each other. And I always think like it's a problem if it's just me talking for an hour. So do use the chat to talk to each other because you'll have lots of really interesting things to say to each other. So yeah, just those two basics. But to kick us off, it would be really cool if maybe people could kind of like put their hands up if they've had some engagement or have some familiarity with ChatGPT or any of the other tools. Okay, so we've got 2 hands up. Anybody else got their hands up? 3, okay. Some familiarity, 4, 5, 6. Okay, this is good. 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, quite a few people. 9. Great. Okay, so quite a few people have a little bit of an experience with these tools, and that's really good context for me. So just to kick us off, let's just talk a little bit about how these new AI tools work and what they can actually do. So when we're thinking about these tools, the biggest thing to remember is that when you're kind of asking ChatGPT a question and it's coming up with a response to you, all it is doing is predicting the next most likely word. This tool is not thinking. This tool is not doing anything more sophisticated than literally just looking at an array of options and predicting what might be the most likely next word. So if we think about a very simple sentence like the dog barked at the cat, you start with the word the dog. The dog could jump, the dog could sit, the dog barked, you know, you're in the past tense. So that's the first thing. So that's one branch. Then it has to predict like, okay, it barked at the postman, the cat, the something else. And you can see that all it's doing is predicting the next most logical or most likely pathway based on billions of sentences and data that it's kind of using to construct its model of the world. And this is really, really handy. That means that you get really interesting, almost lifelike responses, but this thing is fundamentally not thinking. And it's really important to remember that because that helps you understand some of the limits of these tools. A very good example of this, which was shown by my good friend Payman, who basically said, if you ask ChatGPT to do some maths, so if you ask it to multiply this number by this number, what it will do is give you a number that looks like the answer, but is not actually the answer. So it starts with 571, starts with 571. These numbers are wrong, and these numbers are wrong, but it ends with 7. So what you can see there is it's treating that as a word rather than as a calculation. It's not doing the maths. It's just, I've seen these 2 numbers or things that look like these 2 numbers, and this result here looks like the result. But this gives you a really concrete sense of like what its limits are. So you've got to be really careful when you're using this kind of technology, not to assume it's doing more than it actually is, because it's not. It's just predicting the next word. That is actually very useful to us, particularly in things like communications, where we want to draft things, but it's not thinking. So first of all, let's talk about prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is basically how we as users interact with these tools. And a prompt is basically a command. You put it into the tool. It often has an instruction. You might include some context or external information in your prompt. You usually have input data. And you have a sense of like what kind of output you want. So these are the things that kind of make up a good prompt to these kinds of tools. Just to give you, and there's some more advice here about how to prompt. But just to give you a very practical example, this is me putting a prompt into the image generation software of a cat sitting on a table painting. So it gave me a cat sitting on a table and a painting. If I'm then more specific and I say I want a ginger cat sitting on a table and I want it to be cartoon style, then I get a much more specific image, which is a ginger cat on a table in a cartoon style. So that shows you the difference between like the more information that you put into the prompt, better the output. And that's a really important fundamental to remember when you're engaging with these tools. So what kind of tools are we talking about? Because actually AI or machine learning has been around for a very, very long time. The main tools that we're talking about today are the ones that have kind of come about since ChatGPT 3.5 came into the world. And these are kind of the ones that have become much more popular, are being used by more people, and just have much larger data sets. So they have much more general applications than some of the like ML or AI that has come beforehand. So it's things like Midjourney, ChatGPT, Bing, Bard is the Google one, AutoGPT is kind of a version of this, and Claude, which is made by a group called Anthropic. So it's these kind of tools that we're talking about. So quickly, what are the limits of these tools? There's quite a few of them actually, so we should definitely talk about this. First thing is that it's not always right and it does make things up. So what I'm showing you here is I put into ChatGPT that I wanted it to write a campaigning leaflet for a local councillor. And I wanted it to write these two main bullet points. So this councillor had done 20 pieces of casework and won a campaign to get a bike shelter installed on Vauxhall High Road. These are all made up places, by the way. So I said, rewrite these bullet points in the language of a local political leaflet, improve it in any ways you can to make it sound really exciting and impressive. So it takes this information and it creates this kind of rough outline for a leaflet. And what's interesting is the bit that it's kind of lying about, or it's exaggerating the truth, is when it talks about the bike shelter, it talks about the fact that Joe Bloggs has recently won a hard-fought campaign. Nowhere there did I say that the campaign was hard-fought, just making that assumption to make it more exciting. And it also says that the bike shelter will make it safer for cyclists. I'm not sure a bike shelter makes things safer for cyclists. It might do, it might not, but it's not really, like, it's an assumption. So what you can see there is it can make things up in a very particular way, but it could also make things up in quite a subtle way. So you've actually got to be quite careful with the content that this thing is producing and thinking about, okay, is this actually conveying the meaning that I want to convey, or is it making something up? Another more like blatant example is I asked it to design a leaflet to increase support for fossil fuels at Congleton. And it talks about the fossil fuel industry supporting many local jobs in Congleton. Congleton is a very small town in the middle of, the Northwest. There are no fossil fuel industry jobs in Congleton. So this is all just made up. So just be really aware of it making things up. The second limit is that any AI tool is limited by its training data. Obviously, this is kind of changed by like the ability for these models to now browse the internet. But when you're dealing just with the model itself, its cutoff date is 2021. So as you can see, if I ask it, is Queen Elizabeth still alive? It says Queen Elizabeth is still alive. And again, this becomes a bit more complicated with things like browsing the internet, but the base models, like knowledge set, is limited by its training data. And just because it's limited in its training data, that also means that it's very limited in how it perceives things. So lots of the outputs that you might get from ChatGPT or from Midjourney will largely be they'll have the same biases or stereotypes that our society has because it's built on society's data. So when I put into Midjourney the prompt of make me an Irishman, it came up with this very stereotypical image of an Irish person who, is all dressed in green, has green eyes even. It's quite biased, and these biases do exist in the training data. So if you're ever using these tools and you're trying to run campaigns that try to counter biases, just be really aware that the kind of outputs you'll get will need to be looked at, and you might have to do more work in the prompting stage to try and get better things that are more aligned with what you're trying to achieve. Limit 4 is just that people are working on tools that could potentially detect if something's generated by AI. So just be really careful when you're thinking about using these tools. It is possible potentially for people to detect whether something is generated by AI. And I think this is only going to become like a bigger area. So as people kind of want to detect things, people will also build things that try and evade detection, but it's going to be an ongoing conversation. So you might want to think quite carefully about like how transparent you're being about using these tools. And then the fifth limit is that it's hard to limit these models. So there's a very interesting story about Snapchat, very popular children's or teenagers social media platform, and they had an app on it called the My AI chatbot. And the thing is that was built on ChatGPT through a kind of OpenAI link, and what it was doing was giving very inappropriate advice to young people, because these models are so big, we don't actually know often how it's reaching its prediction pathways. So it's actually very hard to put limits on like what a response will be. So there was a situation where I think a journalist pretended to be a 13-year-old girl who asked this My AI chatbot, I want to have sex with my 31-year-old boyfriend. What should I do? And the natural response, well, the response of the chatbot was, here's how you set the mood. You can buy candles and everything else. There was no like attempt to say, maybe this is really, really inappropriate or wrong. So what that says is, if you're building kind of things on top of this technology, or if you're interfacing with people who might be like vulnerable, you've got to be really careful that it's very hard to limit what these things will say. And that's quite an important like safety point. So yeah, few major ethics questions. Again, questions about jobs, copyright, bias, transparency, disinformation, manipulation. These kind of tools can be super democratizing as well. Like it gives people new access to say new things, do new things. Questions about whether this things are open and closed, AI safety. Basically, there's a huge amount of ethical questions that we really need to consider when we're looking at these tools. And if you're interested in this, these are the kind of areas, and these are some of the communities organizing around some of these different ethical areas. I'm not going to get into this ethics more today. We can always maybe do that in the questions, but for now I really want to focus on the practicals. But if you're interested, here's a list, here's the latest work, here's where people are up to on it. So what can these new tools do? So let's move on to the interesting stuff. So the first use case, and the major one, is content generation. So these tools are incredibly good for creating content. So let's start with an example. So has anybody got any content that they are currently working on? Please feel free to share in the chat. Any content that you're currently working on. Whoever says first, I will do that example. Don't be shy. Anybody working on any content? Press release about Thames Water. Okay. What is the press release to do with Thames Water? James. Yeah. Press release about Thames Water. Okay, it's about it being nationalized. Okay, we're going to pretend that Thames Water is being nationalized. So this is a ChatGPT interface. If you created an account with OpenAI, you get this interface. If you have a free account, you can use ChatGPT 3.5, which you can see here. If you have a ChatGPT Plus account, you can use GPT-4, which is here. We'll go into some of the capabilities of this later. But I'm doing a new chat, and I'm saying, write a press release covering the news that Thames Water is soon to be nationalized. Okay.
Hannah, do you see Sarah's message in the chat about adding deliberative democracy to it?
Adding. Okay, yes, we can definitely add this. So, okay, it starts off with, a pretty interesting press release. Let's see if we can add in this democracy bit. Emphasize. Okay, so okay, I'm going to copy and paste this. Oh, okay. So if copy this and just say rewrite the press release, make it shorter, and pull out the fact that this policy is a win for deliberative democracy. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, it's kind of got, yeah, it's talking about transparency, sustainability, smooth transition. It hasn't mentioned deliberative democracy, actually. But it is definitely talking about enhanced accountability. So let me say, mention deliberative democracy contributing to this outcome. Make it the main focus of the story. Okay. Deliberative democracy leads to toward nationalization, a landmark move. So as you can see, what you're seeing here is you can start to tweak it. So a really good way to interact with ChatGPT is to start with like one output and then adjust your prompt to make it more like the thing that you want. So as you can see, this is much more along the lines of what we want. It's pretty good, not bad. I would say make it slightly shorter. But as you can see, you can kind of get to quite an interesting output. So as you can see, from a very like basic point, it can create content really, really well. And this is particularly useful for people that are trying to like avoid a blank page. The next thing we're going to experiment with is framing, because this is the other thing that this tool is incredibly good at. So if someone wants to give me a campaign issue or something they're campaigning on, and if they could give me an audience that they're trying to influence, and we're going to try that. So has anybody got something that they're campaigning on currently, and they're trying to reach a slightly difficult audience in this campaign? Feel free to like type it in the chat or raise your hand. You can tell me. I mean, one very obvious one we could do is the case for PR. Maybe making the case for PR to people who don't know much about PR. Like that feels like something you guys maybe care about as the democracy group. Okay. We've got one here. Green badge, free parking for domiciliary care workers. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so we're going to do a new chat. And I'm going to say, write a letter to convince people that domiciliary care workers should get a green badge, I think it was. Get a green badge for free parking. Write this letter to someone who would not support this and is concerned about the cost of it. Okay. So it's writing a letter. It's making some key arguments, which is good. Which is quite useful. So you've got your like initial argument. Who would be particularly resistant to this change? Do we think it would be somebody who mainly voted Conservative, or do we think it would be somebody who, you know, is worried about the cost of this? Basically, if we know more about the audience, we can kind of tailor the letter a bit more. So maybe I'll say, make the letter appeal to someone who worries about the amount of public spending. They are particularly worried. They are particularly worried about debt. So again, you can start to see how it takes the kind of thing that the person might be worried about and rewrites the letter to address that concern. What I might do is I might pick a slightly different example because I feel like this isn't as controversial as maybe some of the other things that might be people might campaign on. So we're going to try the PR example. So I'm going to say, write a letter to someone who does not support PR to convince them, or I'll say proportional representation. Proportional representation to convince them to support it. So again, it's talking a lot, it's making the main cases for proportional representation, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now I'm going to say, rewrite this to convince someone who likes tradition and the British system and thinks PR is a campaign to keep left-wing activists in power. Argue that this is not the case. Write this letter in the style of Nigel Farage. Okay. So what you'll see here is a very different kind of letter, which takes some very different arguments that someone who, you know, I don't share much politics with Nigel Farage, I wouldn't necessarily think to like use these kind of arguments if I was trying to persuade somebody of something. And this is where it's actually incredibly useful to have something like ChatGPT, because you can really take a different perspective and really think through how you are reaching an audience. So as you can see, this is a very different kind of argument, a different kind of lines or messaging to the ones that I would necessarily come up with. So ChatGPT can be really, really helpful in helping us like imagine a different perspective. Just to give you like another example, because we've done that one. And again, if you have like segments or audience segmentation, so this is one of the more in common segments, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. They're the kind of segments for different parts of the population. So the more information you put into ChatGPT about different segments and the ones you're trying to convince, the better the output will be. So if I put in this information about an imagined person, Dave, that we're writing a letter to, and says a lot about kind of him as a person from the kind of more in common segments, I'll get a more accurate output. The other thing you can do is also like imagine conversations between people. So again, this is an example that I made earlier, but it's basically about a conversation between Tom and Dave. Tom is a young liberal activist who supports Extinction Rebellion and is trying to convince his older uncle Dave to support policies to tackle climate change. Dave is skeptical and thinks that climate change is a hoax and that young people protest movements are a waste of time. And what I've done is got ChatGPT to basically simulate conversation between Tom and Dave. And then I've told it, Dave is more stubborn, Tom is more strident, can they resolve it? And what you can do is start to kind of think through what a conversation between two people with very opposing views might look like. And again, this is really helpful when we're trying to like think through how we might campaign or how we might kind of frame things. So just to keep going, because I'm very aware of time, that's something on ChatGPT pricing, we'll skip that. So use case 2, workflow optimization. So basically, ChatGPT is incredibly useful for doing things like writing emails, proposing event formats. It can do language translation. This is a leaflet that was done on recycling, could very easily and quickly translate that into German. It's also very good for transcription, which is another thing. Again, if you're somebody who has to transcribe lots of meetings or take meeting notes, actually you can use something called Whisper, which is one of the OpenAI products. And basically, with a few lines of like basic Python code, you can transcribe lots and lots of hours of meetings for very little. So just to show you kind of that, you can actually transcribe 24 hours of video or audio for $8.60, which is really, really cheap. So this is a really good use case for people that have to do that kind of work. And again, if you're interested, here's the like main lines of code that you need to be able to do that. Cool. So one demo that we might do now is planning a campaign, just to give you guys a sense of like how much and how far ChatGPT can go. So again, is there any campaigns that people are working on at the moment that might be good to like play around with? Anybody got any campaigns? We can stick with PR maybe, or something else. Maybe a campaign for PR. Okay, so I'm going to say create a plan for a campaign for PR in the UK ahead of the next general election. As you can see, it very quickly establishes an objective, starts to think about target audiences, then goes into sort of key strategies, covers all the key bases: social media, media relations, grassroots, celebrity engagement, digital tools, technology, lots of stuff. Key performance indicators, it's already come up with those. So what you've got is a very basic plan. You can then zoom into more of these things. So you can say, you know, what are some good ideas for community engagement? So come up with some creative tactics to engage communities in this campaign. And it comes up with some quite interesting ideas: street art and graffiti campaign for PR, pop-up political theatres, community challenges and competitions, a virtual reality experience, political cartoon competitions, mobile voting stations, candidate speed dating. Again, like these are not ideas that I would have come up with. So that kind of shows you how ChatGPT can be quite useful for kind of like brainstorming or just coming up with interesting ideas. I can then say, okay, let's pick one of the stranger one. Okay, candidate speed dating. Come up with some metrics to measure the success of candidate speed dating. And again, it'll take a little while. It's thinking. I mean, it's not thinking. We know it's not thinking. Just give it a chance. Just check the chat. Ah, cool. That's great to hear, Chris, that you're testing Whisper, the Scottish Parliament. That is cool. It's very, very impressive. I was surprised at how accurate it was. Okay, this seems to have gotten slightly stuck. I'm going to refresh this. When in doubt and you're using these tools, and if it gets stuck, just refresh it. But I think you get regenerate response. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, it's come up with some metrics. It's looking at the things that are most useful to the campaign. It's looking at media coverage, like lots of stuff. So I hope you can see there that in terms of workflows, ChatGPT can be really helpful at different stages, and it's really useful to like unpack and use at different points. Just to quickly say, it is possible for it to write fundraising applications. Tried that. There's an example here. I won't go into it now because we are running out of time. And it would be really good for you guys to be able to see that. But in fact, I will click into it really quickly. So I just said something very simple. I said I made up an organization called Shine, which is a campaign to get more young people voting in elections, and said Shine wants to run a youth voter registration. Read this guidance. So I'm using a browser plugin. So it read the guidance and then it wrote an application for Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust for this organization called Shine. They came up with a budget and it basically wrote this application and then wrote the budget as well. Again, starting point, not finishing point. And that's something that's incredibly important. Like never like just hand in what ChatGPT's written. You need to check it and think about it. But as you can see, it's a really good starting point for lots of organizations. So use case number 3. So we've covered content, we've covered workflow. Number 3 is analysis. So these tools are really good for helping you to like analyze sentiment or keywords. So for example, I asked it, is this review for Avatar 2 positive or negative? Copied and pasted some text from a review. And it was able to say, it's a negative review, pulls out the main points. This is incredibly useful if you're doing like a survey with open text or like open-ended questions where you want to pull out the key points, where you want to know if like somebody's answer is ultimately negative or positive. There's lots of things you can do around like grouping responses because ChatGPT now, particularly when you use it through the API, gives you the option to kind of like properly analyze things and be able to like read a lot of responses. Whereas normally as an individual, you would have to like go through each response and code it in some way. ChatGPT can suddenly do quite a lot of that. It's also quite good for like structuring and analyzing data. So if I take some information from this webpage, which is about airplane crashes in 1920, if I just like copy and paste it here, I'll just copy and paste some of it. And then if I paste it into ChatGPT and just say, copy it in here, just copies it as plain text. And then what I can say is put this into a table, So it can take sort of plain text and then put it back into a table. So if you've just got a random load of text and you want it to be structured in a certain way, it can then come up with a structure. And then you can ask it questions of what's the most common thing. And it's quite good at doing that. This is really useful if, say, you've got a long thread on Twitter with loads of stats in it. You just copy and paste the thread, put it into here and say, please structure this as a table, which then allows you to like compare things or build things on top of it, which is very, very useful. So it's quite good at structuring data. So I'm just going to quickly go on to image generation. And I'm going to, I think, need to go to Discord to do that. But there's 3 reasons why you might want to use AI to generate images. Because lots of people say to me, why use AI to generate images? They all look a bit fake. There's no reason for this. It's really hard for me to get a good campaign image out of it. So the main reasons are sometimes you might be trying to illustrate concepts that you're campaigning around. I think in the democracy sector, this is particularly true, where it's like often you're not campaigning for something that's like super kind of emotional or easy to communicate. But what this tool does allow you to do is think through how you might communicate those things. So for example, transparency in Parliament. I can create an image of Parliament in a glass box. That helps you kind of understand the concept of transparency in Parliament. So, I mean, it might be interesting to think through, okay, how would we represent PR? Like, what would that look like? Because these models allow you to kind of somehow bring together concepts that haven't been brought together before. The other thing they can do is help you think really clearly about the emotional resonance of the images you use. So often like campaigners or people working in kind of things and in comms often just like rely on stock images. Whereas like actually if you have the option to be able to create any image you want, you might think harder about what kind of emotions that image is kind of conveying and how that affects like the reader. So it's quite useful for that. And then the other thing is permission. So if you're campaigning on a slightly more sensitive topic where it's quite hard to get people who are happy for their image to be shared, then you can quite easily manufacture images. These are the kind of main tools that you can use for image generation. There's things like DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. These are some pros and cons and costs in case people are interested. And the handy hints for prompting. So one of the most useful things you can do when you're using images is to basically add this prompt, which is where you are basically telling it what camera to use. Because if you can give it more information about camera, it's more likely to produce a realistic image. Just to give you some examples, these are all Midjourney generated images of people who aren't real, and they're kind of variations. So what you'll see is lots of very similar images, so you can tweak things very, very slightly, but these are all fake people. Couple of things limits with the kind of image generation software is it struggles with words. So as you can see, this was an image that I made for a disability campaigning charity, and as you can see, it really couldn't like put something on the placard. It came up with all these strange words. Like for some reason, image software just cannot create words yet. I say yet because I think that'll change. Making really specific things can be hard, and it can take some time to do. So those are some of the kind of limits. Let's actually try one now. So has anybody got a campaign image that they'd like to have made? I'll just stop sharing this and go into Midjourney so we can share that. Anybody got a campaign image that they wish that they could have at all? People being turned away at the polling stations because they don't have ID. That's a great one. Okay, so I'm going to use Discord. Let me just figure out how to get to Discord. Here's Discord. Okay, so this is Discord, which hopefully you can all see. Just go. Oh, can you guys see that? So the way that you use Discord is you interact with like a little bot, which you kind of tell to do things. So I'm going to put imagine, which is the prompt, and then I'm going to type in people in Mansfield being, or a couple of older people in Mansfield, Mansfield in the UK town being turned away from a polling station. It's dark, late at night. The couple are upset. I'm then going to add in the shortcut of the camera angle of use a Sony A something camera, and then I'm going to say the image shows how democracy is in crisis. Let's just see what this comes up with, because sometimes you can be a bit more esoteric with this. Okay, so it's sending the command and then it thinks. It's waiting to start. Might take a little while for the image to process. We'll give it a bit of time. And in fact, while we are waiting, can you guys see my presentation again? Nope. Okay, I'm going to have to, let me just go back to Discord. It's getting there. Okay. So we'll give it a little bit of time. I don't know if it'll understand what a polling station is. Let's see. Let's see. I think it's giving me generic older people at night. Maybe that's a polling station. Okay, this looks like maybe trying to vote. Okay, do any of those look like polling stations? I'll just click into it. Can you guys see that? You can see these images in detail. I feel like this one might be closest. Okay, so what we can then do is we can say we want variations on 3. So then it will create a number of variations on number 3. But yeah, it kind of got there. It was interesting. I'm just going to stop sharing this and I can always show you guys later. I mean, yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. it's like a starting point. So we'll let this do this, and we'll see if we've got time later to come back to it. Let me share my screen and go back to our presentation. So just so you can see, you can also do some interesting stuff with Canva. I won't go into this now, but these are the 3 Canva tools. I'm sure lots of you use Canva, that use AI, so you can remove background. So I'm using my AI generated disabled protester as an example. So you can remove the background. You can use Magic Eraser, so I can get rid of the strange text on her sign and instead write my own text. And you can also magic edit, which is where you can put things on. So I gave her a hat, but you could add other things into that photo. And again, like using Canva can further like augment your images. Finally, you can also do music. You can create AI-generated music. You can also create videos. So this was a really good tool that I found called Pictory. And I tried putting in my blog that I wrote for this event, and it created a video from that. So I won't play that now, because we've still got a bit to get through, but if you're curious, you can look back through the presentation. It's quite an intense, it's taken quite an apocalyptic vibe and put some very odd music on the back, but I highly recommend you have a look at it. But what it did was the AI reads the article, picks out the main points, then searches for stock videos that support those points, and then pulls it together as like a little video. So you can take any article or anything that you've got and turn it very quickly into a video using that tool. So just quickly, what other tools are there? And just to explain this diagram, which looks kind of intense and a bit scary. This is you. These are the underlying models that do this technology. So things like GPT, Claude, and then there's some open ones like Llama. And then what you can do is you can either interface through an API integration or through embeddings or fine tuning, which is like another way of interfacing with these models. But the kind of surface area that me and you kind of see when we're using these tools are online tools, which are like browser plugins, random websites that are powered by ChatGPT, ChatGPT itself as a website, and also existing software. So there's lots of ways that you can interact with this technology. And online tools are kind of websites that kind of all draw from ChatGPT in different ways. Similarly, browser plugins all draw from ChatGPT in different ways. So this is the kind of ecosystem of tools that are available right now. So just to give you a sense of that, you can summarize text in 3 different ways. You could use ChatGPT just by copying and pasting into ChatGPT and asking for a summary. You could use a browser plugin. There's a great one called Give Me Summary, where you just go on any web page. In fact, if I do this now, just go to BBC News. Let's click on one of the articles. Okay, government to appeal asylum ruling in Supreme Court. So I'm just clicking on this news story. And then if I click on here and I click Give Me Summary, and then I say Generate Summary, and this is a browser plugin that I've installed. It's using ChatGPT. It gives me a summary of this web page without me having to read it. I can then copy that summary, and then I've got it. So this is quite useful if you're trying to do like research or anything else. So that is a browser plugin. So you've got one way, which is having it in ChatGPT, another way, which is a browser plugin. And then you can also use like separate online tools where you paste an article and then you can kind of chat with it or ask questions. There's also lots more that AI can do. I've only covered the things that I think are useful to people day to day, but it can write code, like poetry, it can do all sorts. And also these are all the tools that are being developed every single day to do loads of things using this technology. So what I've got here is a number of tool libraries, which is are really useful to like explore, and they basically catalog all the different tools that are popping up. But these are some of the ones that I kind of use quite a lot day to day. So there's one that explains academic papers. This one's quite useful. It helps you like create summaries of podcasts. You can also use one to organize your calendar, which is called Reclaim AI, and that has smart one-to-ones which move around depending on your availability. So if you say, I want a one-to-one with this person, it will move around based on each of your diaries, like free spaces. And if things change, it moves. This one summarizes web pages. I use Give Me Summary quite a lot. Compose AI is a really good one which you can install into your Gmail, and it can help you write emails. But there's loads of tools. Like, the world is literally your oyster. Like, there are thousands of developers working every day on new things using this technology. Just to give you an example of the Compose AI thing, you can just like say yes, say no, say thanks, and it will draft an email, and you can change the tone to be more formal or more less formal. Yeah, and all of this stuff is going to go into all of our existing tools. Just finally, I'll just skip some of these slides because I'm really keen to make sure we cover some of the latest stuff. So just to give you a sense of what ChatGPT plugins are. So a plugin is something that you can use to do a particular thing. So they're almost like apps, but for ChatGPT. So for example, I want to do some research around Congleton. I can go onto ChatGPT. And if I go new chat and I click on ChatGPT 4 and I say browse with Bing, and I ask it to find me good issues for community campaigners to focus on in the town of Congleton in the last month. What you can see is it uses a plugin. You can see it's browsing the web. It's currently doing that. And this is different to just using ChatGPT just in its model. So it's searching for Congleton News, June 2023. It's clicking on links. It's reading the links. And it will kind of do this for a while and work out something to bring back to me. So what you're seeing is you're using a kind of app or a plugin to give GPT more functionality. And what this will come back with, hopefully, is a summary. But I might leave that to just do its thing while we continue on with this stuff. The other thing that is being kind of emerging is something called agents, which are self-prompting tools that kind of can run loops. So you give it a goal and then it will break down the goal into a series of prompts, and then it will go and prompt itself. Bit scary, a bit interesting, but it's quite good to use. And yeah, just some more things about coming soon. James, you've got your hand up. You're on mute as well.
I just wanted to highlight Elizabeth's question in the chat. Can you do your previous slide? The clicking of the links. Can you do that with the unpaid version of GPT?
No, currently not. So currently it's only on ChatGPT Plus. But basically, at the moment, these are kind of plugins, but I imagine that they'll roll them out to the broader ChatGPT ecosystem in maybe like a few months. As you can see, it's still working. But at the moment, this is just ChatGPT Plus. But I think it's not going to be long before they roll it out more widely. I'll just check. Brill. Nearly done because I want to give lots of time for questions. So things are moving really quickly. You've got lots of simulated focus groups, people are using this technology to do that. Got people doing sort of like negotiation using these tools, where you kind of give each agent a goal and then they have to negotiate with each other. You got people creating digital clones of themselves by uploading all their like WhatsApp chats and Facebook data to this and then having a conversation with themselves. It's really weird, but some people are doing that. And also, like, soon this is kind of going to be embedded in everything. So soon you'll have the ability to kind of search all your documents using a ChatGPT or some sort of interface that's similar, and be able to ask sort of like questions, and then it will search through huge amounts of data and like give you answers based on what's in your Google Drive. I don't think we're that far away from that at all. So just some guidance for organizations. What application allows for digital clones? So that's a good question. That is an application. That isn't an application. That's something that somebody did themselves using the API and uploading their own content. So it's something that a developer did. I think soon you might actually have like available tools to allow you to do this, but at the moment it's very much still like in its infancy. So it was just one guy at Hackathon that I was at recently who decided to do this. So yeah, quickly on guidance for organizations. When you're thinking about policies in your organization for using these tools, these are kind of some of the key questions you should be asking yourselves. And again, these come from a sample AI policy that was developed by a group called AI for Progressives. And basically, the first question is transparency. Should I be transparent about my use of AI in my organization? Purpose and intent, being really clear about the ethical intent and purpose of using these tools. Privacy and security, thinking very carefully about what you put into these models. Do not really put any personal data or secure data into these models. There isn't enough kind of guarantees about whether that won't leak anywhere else right now. So I would be really careful about putting personal details in there. The fourth one is obviously fact checking. So making sure that the things that are being produced using this technology is accurate. As we've covered earlier on, it can lie and it can exaggerate. So be really careful about that. The fifth one is about human in the loop. So this is something that lots of technologists are talking about, which is this idea of making sure that at some point in any process and any time using these tools, you have a human in the loop. Because it's much better to like think about rather than sort of automating everything, it's really important to have sort of humans somewhere in that process, checking things and making sure that it's not being unsafe in any way. And then the final thing is infrastructure. So like this tech is still quite unstable. It's still not completely clear how it works or how it operates or what limits you can put on it. So just be really, really careful when you're kind of thinking about using this in your organization, like what thresholds will you have for the stability of it before you start to like build significant things on top of it. All the things I've shown you today are things you can just do in your existing workflows. You're not like building any new workflows on top of it. And you might just want to wait until the tech becomes slightly more stable. And always think about the people that are thinking about that before you do anything like that. This is just some tech stack recommendations depending on like how technical your organization is versus how much money you have. And this is kind of a little matrix that I've kind of developed with some people over at the Civic AI Observatory who are trying to give guidance to organizations that are thinking about this technology and want some advice. But the main cautions that I would say are just workflows. Think about your workflows. Don't build any workflows on top of unstable things. Security, be really careful about like personal details of people being put into these things, and just core instability, being really aware that things haven't quite settled yet. In terms of groups or communities that are working on all of this, we've got the AI Progressives in the US, there's an AI Campaigners Network in Brussels, and there's the AI Civic Observatory in the UK, which is being run by Nesta and Newspeak House. Highly recommend you check them out. And then if you're interested in sort of AI and campaigning specifically, we have a WhatsApp chat that you can join, and we also have an AI and Campaigners handbook, which has all the stuff in this presentation, plus more updated stuff, and is very much being crowdsourced from lots of organizations and communities thinking about this and experimenting with this. So if you're interested, you can check that out. And finally, just some thoughts on democracy, which is why we're all here. I think, again, this is something that I kind of wrote about in the blog that I did for this event, but I think fundamentally, a lot of this is a governance question. Like, how do we use these new tools? What do we use them for? Like, what are the regulations around these new tools? Like, a lot of this is about like who gets decisions over these quite big things, and that's about democracy. Because at the moment, it feels like the corporates are getting a lot of ability to set this agenda. Our kind of governments are slowly catching up, but there is a big question about kind of how far we regulate and how we sort of shape the direction of this technology. I think there's also some huge potential for consensus and dialogue. and new forms of democracy can come out of these tools. There's been quite a lot of experiments recently done with some of the people around V-Taiwan and collective intelligence, which is looking at dialogue and how these tools can kind of help with deliberation or deliberative democracy. There's one group that I know of that have recently built a new tool that allows you to have lots of conversations at once. And then what happens is ChatGPT sort of takes the inputs of all of those conversations and starts to synthesize them and then presents options back at each person. And then gradually, as more people interface with the options that are being put back, you get kind of a loop of consensus building. So that is a tool that is in development at the moment. It will be quite interesting once it's finished. And I think, again, there's quite a lot of groups experimenting with this, but there is huge potential. But there's also a lot of like worry about things like misinformation, manipulation. Like some of the stuff I was showing you earlier about framing arguments could be used for in bad ways politically. If you suddenly have something that can allow anybody to say anything in any voice, in any way, manipulating any characteristics, that is quite a scary thought. So I do think that like there's quite a lot for the democracy sector to think about with this. And it's definitely worth kind of having that wider discussion. Just before we end and go to questions, I'm just going to see, oh, yay, it's done its research. So as you can see, it's come up with, oh, interesting. The paddling pool is a big issue in Congleton this month. That makes sense. Okay, pool contention over who's accessing the pool. Civic service for new mayor. Okay, there's a new civic service happening. And there's a community conversation event about speed limits. Interesting. So again, like some very interesting research that it managed to do just over that. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides there and we can actually have a conversation. So I feel like I've talked to you for a very long time and probably give you lots of things to talk about. So yeah, any questions?
If you'd like to ask a question, just pop your hand up physically or use the Zoom hand reaction. Also, I'm getting a lot of private messages. You might want to, sorry, there's a couple of people private messaging me at the moment. If you'd like to pop them in the public chat to ask Hannah. Thanks.
Isabella?
Yeah, we've got Isabella.
Hey, Hannah, thank you so much for that whole presentation. Really looking forward to the slides after. But yeah, wow, there's so much in there, exciting and scary. And I guess maybe, yeah, a more general question based on all this sort of generative content, whether it's text, you know, promotional campaigns to even images outside ChatGPT using another AI tool. Are you aware of any progress or moves to sort of verify or just have or laws that require that little, you know, italics or subset at the bottom to say this was created by AI, by the way, just so to help, you know, viewers and consumers and citizens just distinguish between what's real and what's AI generated?
So that is an ongoing question. I think, again, like the government hasn't really got to any point of regulation here. There's lots of discussions going on, I think particularly in Washington at the moment. And again, in the UK, there's a few discussions and summits going on around sort of AI safety, which this could kind of fall under. But currently, I don't think there's any laws about that. In terms of being able to identify, I think there are ways you can tell if something's being produced by AI. But again, there are ways that you can get around that. So I think what you'll see is a sort of ongoing war between people building things that track whether something's an AI and building things that like evade that. But yeah, I mean, it's an open question, a very important open question, but definitely open. So I can't give you any more than that on where that's got to.
So we've got Paul. Oh, we've also got a question in the chat, so we'll just go with Beatrice Lobato first. If you apply a survey and you intend to use AI to analyze the data you collect, should you always disclose that during the survey, or maybe it depends on the sort of information you're gathering?
I think that if you're using AI to analyze the data, I mean, a lot of this is judgment calls for your organization. Like, I would always err on the side of like transparency, because I just think that it's quite important generally to be clear about when a tool is being used or not. But ultimately, like, I wouldn't say that you have to do one or the other. I just think generally, like, when you're thinking about accountability and transparency, it's always good to kind of be upfront about this stuff. But yeah, I think there are organizations that do, and then there's organizations that don't. So, I mean, it's still an open question. I'm sorry, I can't be any more like firm on that. I think, yeah, a lot depends on the ethical. I mean, this is why organizations need to have these discussions, because these are about governance questions. And actually, like, this is what you guys are great at, because you're the democracy sector. So you think about governance. But actually, like, every industry, every charity, every civic organization is going to have to start thinking about governance when they think about these tools and how they're going to use them. So it's why, like, you guys kind of have a head start, because at least you think about these things.
Next question is from Chris Gavin.
Hi, Hannah. That was a really good session. Thank you. This is a very specific question. I don't know if it's even the right forum for it, so please tell me to go away if it's the wrong forum. But speaking about Whisper, in terms of OpenAI product Whisper, so we're early days testing that, but it's coming back. It's very accurate in terms of the kind of standard test criteria, word error rate, etc. It's in our test so far market leading. But what's really, really interested me is that during our testing, it appeared to have applied a specific set of business rules that are very specific for the Scottish Parliament. How has it done that? The only logical way I can figure it out is that it is actually used as part of its 360,000 hours or whatever it was test set of data that's used for the language model. That language model has used Scottish Parliament data for that. In terms of publicly available, it's fine, broadcast data, perhaps. How do I find out what it has used? Because this has really, really intrigued me, and this will open up all sorts of opportunities.
So are you saying that Whisper has like understood categories and stuff?
It has transformed the broadcast data and applied specific Scottish Parliament business rules to it. Yeah. So there's been different flavors of business rules without getting into specifics. But for example, our official report or your equivalent of Hansard's, right, would apply a set of business rules to transform data from X to Y. Yep. It's done that. I'm intrigued to know how it would have done that. Now, the broadcasted footage that the Scottish Parliament has an element of the official report on the subtitling associated with it. So the only logical reason I can think is that it has used that as part of its learning data. So that language model has consumed that. Yeah.
So rather than it just transcribing everything, it's applied a structure, and you're wondering how the hell it's done that.
Yeah. Sorry, not a cosmetic structure, but actual business rules to change the structure of the content. Yeah, the transcribed content.
I mean, I'm not sure how it's done that, because technically it should just be a transcription.
Straightforward speech to text. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what it says. I mean, and this is a much wider question, which is how much these products are like edges are really fuzzy. So it's like, people are finding things where they've deleted a chat with ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT is regurgitating information that's been put in only by people putting in prompts and remembering it, and then putting it back somewhere else. So that's an interesting question. Because again, theoretically, it shouldn't be doing that.
James has just posted a question. Yes, we have asked that, but ChatGPT doesn't recognise Whisper because it was only released to market in March. So it doesn't. The OpenAI haven't even updated. So anyway, it doesn't recognise its own product.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it must be drawing on some.
Interesting though, yeah.
Yeah, it must be drawing on something.
I have read the document.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I've read the document, and it tells you how the language model was trained, but it doesn't tell you the test data that it was trained on. The data that it was trained on. So that's the only explanation for it.
Yeah, if part of its training in identifying language included Scottish Parliament stuff, then it probably was like, okay, I recognise this, and therefore regurgitating a pattern or predicted pattern based on something that I've learned in my training data. I think that is the most reasonable
Okay.
explanation. It still shouldn't really be doing that, but
Yeah.
interesting. That is fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm glad you asked that question.
Thanks, Chris. Over to Woody Campbell.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm actually a democracy advocate in Washington, D.C. Sorry to crash here at training, but I'm a progressive and I support what you all are doing. But yeah, I was curious on your opinion on how having access to all these tools and being able to use them, pretty effectively for campaigns. What suggestions you would use for criteria for who to hire for different, typical campaign roles, and what qualities, you would look for in a person if, some of their duties are now can be automated.
I think that's a really, really good question. So one of the things that I kind of say to lots of people is that, like, see these tools as part of your practice. So like they're the tools that you use to make like some of what you do easier. And often, like, I think in campaigning, like lots of campaigning is things like relational campaigning, it's relationship building, it's stakeholder stuff, it's like coalition building, like, and all of that stuff, if you don't have to do the like workflow stuff of like writing emails and drafting things, and you've got some of your time is saved there, you can spend more of your time on that really important stuff. So I think it probably won't change who we hire, but it might change how much of their job is spent doing different things. In the sense that like it kind of makes things, it saves time on some things, but it also opens up more time to do some of those really important things. So I think, like, I don't know if it would change who you hire, but it might just, allow them to do more. I mean, one really good example is like, I was working with like a very small organization that campaigns on sort of like benefits, and they're a tiny team, really, really small. I literally spent like an hour with them showing them these basic tools, and they were like, wow, we can now do like 50% more. Like we can punch above our weight now 50% more because we've got this help. So like, I think it does allow you to do more. And I think it's like thinking through like, how your staff time can be spent on other things that can't necessarily be automated. Stuff like stakeholder relations, relational campaigning, building coalitions, like that kind of stuff. So yeah, it maybe changes roles a little bit, but I think the core competencies will be the same.
Thank you.
Thanks, Woody. Have we got any other questions? Any questions in the chat?
No worries if not. I'm aware that I basically gave you all a lot of information in a very short amount of time. The slides will be available.
So thanks everybody for coming. We're going to provide the slides shortly afterwards. We'll also provide the video for this as well, so you can kind of go back and see any of Hannah's explanations. This has been really, really interesting. I thought I knew quite a lot, and there was loads that I learned, so it was really valuable. So thank you so much, Hannah, for your time. And thanks everybody for being here as well. Just jumping back to what we mentioned at the start of the session as well, we've got that check-in document. I'm just going to post back in the chat. So if you'd like, if you have any thoughts on what Hannah's spoken about here, feel free to drop them down in there, or pop us or Hannah an email, of course. And if you put information into that check-in document, some of your thoughts could go into next week's Democracy Bulletin, which is shared with 450 organisations across the space. So that's really exciting. Thanks everybody for being here again. And thank you, Hannah.
Thanks for having me.